is happening? Nate Hoyle here. Welcome to the Secret Restaurant Podcast. And the date doesn't matter because I'm going to upload this later. But what's going on? How you doing? How's it hanging? Whenever someone's like, how's it hanging, man? You know what they're talking about. You know what they're referring to when they ask you that question. And don't be afraid to answer truthfully. Okay, all right, that's enough. I am recording this on Monday, which means that I've just had a full weekend of bliss and joy. What did I do? Okay, so one of the things I went to, our minor league baseball team played on Sunday, and went to that, first time going to that stadium since maybe 4 or 5 years. I was Googling it. I guess used to be called John O'Donnell Stadium, now it's called Modern Woodman because of the ads. Like all stadiums are sponsored or whatever now. But I did not realize the building of the stadium broke ground to be built in 1930. So almost 100 years ago. And it's been around. They've renovated it twice. Opened in 1931. So that's kind of something I did not realize. It's interesting to look at the history of baseball stadiums and stuff like that, because that one actually here in the Quad Cities is very old. Like some of the oldest MLB stadiums are only a few decades older than that. So very old stadium. It's been used for mostly baseball. It used to be used for football, like high school and college football. And now it is used for the River Bandits, which is our minor league baseball team. That is a alleyway, can't remember how you call it, gateway leading up to the Kansas City Royals. It used to be the Minnesota Twins when I was growing up, which was cooler because I liked the Minnesota Twins growing up, and the Royals are the enemy of both the Twins and the White Sox. So, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. But, yeah, I hadn't been there in a long time. It's funny because every time I go there, it seems like they're adding on more like amusement rides in the stadium. It sounds silly unless you see it, but there was a Ferris wheel put in a while back that's kind of become a monument in the stadium. So that was a while ago. It's not huge, but it's like a full Ferris wheel that people ride on in the outfield. And now they have other rides too. There must be 4 or 5 of them. There's like a little roller coaster people can go on. I don't really know the names of amusement rides, so I can't tell you what all there is there, but there's maybe 3 or 4 things that you would find in a fair, rides like that in the baseball stadium. It's like, isn't it just enough to have America's greatest pastime going on? You really need to put all that stuff there, but I guess it's probably for kids and stuff. When I was a kid going there, I remember we just had enough fun just being there and enjoying the lawlessness of being out in public when there was more of you than there were parents. That was the joy we found. I do remember, so they have like a mascot. So they're called the River Bandits again, and their mascot is called, I think his name's Bandit, but he's a raccoon bandit. So like, the raccoons have like the eyes, the dark eyes, and so that's kind of, I don't really know why there's been that mascot for as long as I can remember, and then they switched over to the Quad City Swing and then went back to the River Bandits. But anyway, they do have a mascot, and I remember one of the earlier times I went there with like a bunch of my fellow school classmates and other children. I don't know how old we were, probably like 10 or 11. And I remember people were getting in trouble because they were harassing the mascot, like grabbing his tail, and people actually, were really in trouble for that. Maybe they weren't allowed back for a long time. Big deal. So now, I guess that's why they put things like a giant Ferris wheel out there so that kids don't harass the mascots. Society evolving, learning from past generations' misbehavior. But it was fun. I do like going to baseball games. Probably one of my favorite things to do. Honestly, went to a Cubs game also. This was a month ago or so, maybe a little bit less than that. Always great to go to Wrigley Field. I don't know why this is the case, but no matter where I stand or sit in the stadium, whether I'm way up in the upper deck or on the first layer of seats, whether it's at John O'Donnell or Wrigley or Rate Stadium where the White Sox play or whatever, I don't know what's the problem, but I can always see the calls better than the umpire can. Why is that? Why is it that when I'm sitting there, I can see things are clearly a strike, I'm just calling it a ball, clearly safe, I'm just calling it out. Maybe they should just have the umps be sitting up in the stands and then they can make calls better, you know? They can sit amongst the other fans who will even help them, perhaps. Nico Horner sliding into second, obviously safe. If the ump were sitting up in the stands, he might get that call right because he'd be able to see it better with us instead of calling that out. And then, the fans don't have to boo him. It's a pretty good idea. Have the umps all be up in the stands and then they can see better with the rest of us. I got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to move on from that idea, but remind me later because I feel like that might be something worth revisiting, writing a letter to the MLB. But that was Sunday, and then Saturday, I went to a craft beer event. This was in the East Village in Davenport, like they blocked off the street, and it was called Village Hops. It's an annual thing because I've heard about it but never gone to it until now. I think this was the third one they did maybe. Because my parents went the first year and were gleaming about it, talking about how great it was. And then anybody who follows my Instagram or hears me talking about like when we would do brewing, my friend John and I would brew some beers. We would use the Village Hops samplers when we were testing things. So if you've seen those videos, that's what I'm talking about. But you get one of those. It's the same thing as like the glasses they use on a flight. Like a flight of beer. It's like a little goblet that's maybe 6 ounces or 5 ounces. And so you get one of those and then you pay your ticket to get in and then you just get to sample whatever. And there were probably like 20 breweries there in tents. A bunch of good ones that I'm not going to name drop. Not unless they pay me. But that was pretty fun. And it was a pretty hot day out. We basically stayed until everyone was shutting down. A bunch of the tents were actually closing down when we were leaving. And don't really have as much to say about that, I guess. Sorry. But kind of wore my energy out thinking about baseball. But I guess that's how it goes, right? All right, let's talk about some books. The good thing about not doing the podcast for like a month at a time is that it really starts to build up which books I haven't talked about. But the hard part is choosing which one to talk about first. I feel like I've got a cycle going, so maybe I could talk about some science fiction. Oh no, I talked about science fiction last time. I talked about Octavia E. Butler. Well, let's just keep talking about science fiction. So this is a book that I was going to maybe include in my favorite books I read, but honestly, it was mainly for not enjoying the book, but for just thinking about it. So perfect thing to talk about. It's from an author named Larry Niven. He's a science fiction writer who I think he had his heyday maybe in the 70s and 80s onward. And he is discussed a lot. He's not as famous as, say, like Heinlein or Asimov, but he's sort of in that school. Maybe he came out just a little bit later, and so his influence wasn't as impactful. I'm sort of just riffing. But the thing that I like about him, his imagination is kind of unexpected. Like when he comes up with his ideas, it's not really like, oh, wow, what a clever thing. Utopias might be exactly that in the future. He's more in the school of like, what the fuck? How did you come up with this? Which I think overall is just more my vibe anyway. But the book I read, if I haven't said it yet, it's called Protector. And it's interesting for a couple reasons. So he has like sci-fi epics and large books that are really thought out series and concepts. But ironically, the first one that I actually sit down and read the whole thing of him, this book, instead of being a huge series, it's one book with two novellas just kind of stuck together. That there is one character in both novellas, but it's really not like a flowing start to finish narrative. It's like you can tell that it's two kind of 100-page stories that have one of the same characters in it, and then they just like feel like they're just slapped together. So let's discuss whether or not that might be effective. Because I think a lot of people, and it is actually what happened, that is what the origin of this book was, is it was not even serialized. It was two separate stories published in science fiction magazines that were combined into a release of one print paperback. I don't know if it was ever released in hardcover, but so my fear, if I were to do that, for example, if I were to publish almost an adjacent book where I had two short stories, two novellas come out in magazines, and then I decided to package them into one book as one novel, I would be afraid that readership would feel like they were kind of tricked, or feel like they were kind of purchasing something that feels cheap or feels thrown together, which maybe thrown together is the biggest problem. Because one of the reasons why this is so thought-provoking to me is because I do think it's something that could really work. I do think there could be a serialized, just two novellas put together and they're combined and they tell this really effective story, or they tell this really iconic two episodes of the same larger idea or statement or book or whatever. But that being said, just getting down to it, the two stories in this Protector by Larry Niven, the first one is interesting and good, and then the second one is so boring. It's like it falls really flat. So let's talk about the plot. So it basically centers around an alien species that has two or three stages of its life, all revolving around keeping their bloodline or keeping their species alive. And so I can't remember if there is a first childhood stage, but the adult stage is where they breed, actually. So they breed, they multiply. And then the third stage, once they reach a certain age, they become these sort of protector species. And how they do that is there's this strange root that the alien species eats. They eat it until they get sick. And it changes, they eat so much of this root that it basically changes their body, it preserves their body. And so therefore when they preserve their body, they're able to preserve their bloodline, their DNA. And then the main character of this first one of a couple, is this kind of protector species that's been eating these roots, and he's been traveling light years and light years. Great span of time in a spaceship because he's trying to travel and pass and get his kind of line of species to another part of the vast galaxies of outer space. And so that first novella operates like that. It starts with the alien species traveling in a ship, and then it switches back to humans who they don't have anything to do with this species. And then it goes back and forth pretty rapidly, actually, almost on a paragraph to paragraph or 3 paragraphs to 3 paragraphs between this protector species and then the humans that are eventually going to have contact with it. And that story was very interesting. And then the second story, things happen in it. I won't spoil it because something happens at the climax of the first one that creates a situation in the second one. But it just felt like almost maybe he had written the second one unsure what he was trying to do, or unsure what sort of arc he was trying to create. It felt very drifting, and it felt very, the characters weren't interesting. And so maybe that is the biggest flaw in thinking about whether or not you can take two novellas and just combine them. The biggest flaw in this book is not that he did that, but rather that the second half didn't feel necessary or thought out or even to be like a productive add-on to the first novella in it. And maybe even the only reason I'm talking about it or feeling like it's worth talking about is because of how it seems like a failed attempt, because now that I'm thinking about it, I think even like the Foundation series, the first Isaac Asimov Foundation story series, or the book of it, actually was also two or three or perhaps four already published stories that combined to become one novel, but perhaps that one was just more effective, and so it's not something that you even consider. You just read it and you say, well, maybe this was published in 4 different places, but it's one story. I believe the first Stephen King Dark Tower Gunslinger novel was also separate stories. Well, there you go. Once again, I am talking about the same topics that I was talking about a year ago in the podcast episodes that I'm attaching to the ends of the new ones, because the last episode, the throwback one, was about Stephen King's novella books. So that would be another example. So those ones, he's done it maybe 4 or more times, maybe 3, but he'll have books that have 4 novellas within them, and they actually are very iconic stories. So one of them that I was talking about last week, or a year ago, but attached last week, was the Different Seasons one, which included such stories as Shawshank Redemption, the story which turned into, it's called The Body, and it turned into Stand By Me. And those stories in that book are not connected hardly at all, except maybe there's probably connections with his sort of whole universe that people kind of study. But they're not related at all. So would it be better for this Protector book, instead of having 2 stories that are loosely attached, but one of them isn't very good, would it be better to have 2 really good stories that don't have to have the same characters in it? I would say that one story in Different Seasons, 1/4 of the book is probably longer than this whole Protector book. So that's something too. But I don't know what people want. What do you want? You tell me. I'm just trying to get a sense of things, and you're just sitting there silently. And this isn't usually how conversations work. Usually you're supposed to answer, so kind of making me a little bit uncomfortable. No, I'm just kidding. Now, I like this Larry Niven writer, though, and I'm going to read more of his stuff. Like I said, he has some really out there ideas, and I think that's an important thing when you think about art. But I also think that we are continually seeing that creatively inventive people have been asked to involve themselves in politics, involve themselves in government, and to use their imagination in places like that. And I think we've seen again and again that it's like kind of a bad idea. And if you're a fan of Larry Niven, you know what I'm talking about, because it's pretty much plastered as a stain over what he, like his career, I guess. You know what? I'm just going to leave it at that and be mysterious. I'm going to start wearing like a bald cap when I record these, because I keep on scratching my head, and then I feel like you can hear me scratching my head. But I'm scratching my head because that's what you do when you're thinking. Everybody knows that. You scratch your head until a light bulb appears above it and brightens up. And that's how you get ideas. Okay, that's enough. Okay, so my throwback episode is from September 2024. Creaking across the floor. So it's September 5th, 2024. I guess I'll talk about food trucks. I remember that one. All right. I'll see you guys maybe this week or next. Take care of yourself.